Okay, let's start. Hello, this is Fred Iantorno, and I'd like to welcome everyone to TechTalk 360, sponsored by AirPro Diagnostics. Thank you to Lonnie Margle, Josh McFarland, Michael Quinn, and Team AirPro for making this possible. Our goal is to present topics that you won't normally see in other webinars, and we've got another good one for you today. Our webinars are usually presented every other month. However, due to a scheduling issue, the next webinar will be held April 23rd, so mark your calendars. I would now like to turn things over to our two great hosts, Jordan Hendler and George Avery. Hey, George, you want to start
Good
us
morning.
off?
Good morning. Good morning. Or good afternoon, whatever it applies. Is there an afternoon? I think there is. Anyway, hi, Jordan. Good
Hello.
to have you. We got a great one. Thank you, Fred. Jordan and I kind of toggle back and forth to start her off. So I got the short straw. That's not a good thing to say, but I got the opportunity. My name is George Avery, and I've been around for quite a while. I spent 34 years with a large insurer and a past chair of the National Auto Body Council, and also had an opportunity to be the past chair of the Collision Industry Conference. So I enjoy that. And I always want to say, if you're anybody, especially insurers, go to CIC. Jordan does a great job with CIC, and it continues to grow. And I'm so glad that they have CIC, and I'm part of it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jordan, a little bit about herself, and then we'll get some housekeeping out of the way.
So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Fred, for allowing us this opportunity to co-host this together. It's really fun. I will be representing the collision side of the fence. I have been in the collision industry now 27 years. I work with the Collision Industry Conference, as George mentioned, as well as associations like the Society of Collision Repair Specialists, Washington Metropolitan Auto Body Association, and the Southeast Collision Conference. So that's my background. I've been advocating for the repair side, but also managing that conference, which I agree, George. It's the best place where all segments come together to discuss issues. And with that, I think we can keep it going so that we can get to our illustrious presenter.
All right, and we do have a good one today. So let's get a couple things out of the way. We obviously need to do that antitrust. Everybody knows that. And it must be read out loud as participants of this webinar. We need to be mindful of the constraints of antitrust laws. There shall be no discussions of agreements or concerted actions that may restrain competition. This prohibition includes the exchange of information concerning individual prices, rates, coverages, market practices, claim settlement practices, or any other competitive aspect of an individual company's operation. And each participant, that's you and us, is obligated to speak up immediately for the purposes of preventing any discussion falling outside these bounds. So we keep track of that, Jordan and I do. But as you know, if you have a concern, please contact us through the Q&A as soon as possible. And speaking of the Q&A, Jordan, if you could outline the Q&A process so everybody knows how we're going to handle questions.
So as our presenter goes through his information, today we are going to hold questions to the end, but your opportunity to interact with this presentation is by using the Q&A feature on your Zoom. And what you will do is you can just put in a question. If we can ask it, with a combination of other questions, we may do that, or we may ask your question outright. And I will bring those forward for our presenter. And then I think George and I usually include our own couple of questions in there. So with that, if you have a question about the questions even, go ahead and drop that in the Q&A. That's your opportunity to interact with us.
Exactly. And that way, as Jordan said, I'll pick up the insurer ones, and Jordan will take repair facility. And Jordan and I get along pretty well. We may not agree on everything sometimes, but pretty good to have someone like Jordan on if the other side of the table, if that's the right way to do it. So let me introduce our speaker today. The title is The New Administration in Congress, and of course, the Independent Auto Repair Outlook. And we've got Bob Redding with us today. And of course, Bob is the ASA, the Automotive Services Association representative, and he's in Washington, D.C. And my guess is, if anybody happens to watch any TV, knows there's a lot going on. But what I like about this, Bob, and I appreciate you being with us, one of the things that I like we usually get pretty specific into particular states, and I don't know, maybe there's going to be a couple you might want to talk about. But I think for the audience, I think this is a great opportunity to have more of a global look or a national look at what's happening out there. And if there's any time, there's a lot of podcasts out there, and this one is a good one. It's a good way to take an hour, take a break, catch your breath, learn a little something. Like Fred said, we try to bring unique things to you. So with that, Bob, I want to thank you very much for joining us, and appreciate your perspective. Always like hearing you at CIC, but to have an opportunity to spend this time with you today is really good. So Jordan, anything I missed? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Bob. Bob's got a PowerPoint deck he's going to go through. And I believe we'll probably take, I think it might have been said, but we'll take all the questions at the end.
Mhm.
And again, if you go ahead and use your Q&A, we might hold it. Doesn't mean we're ignoring you, but we might hold it until the end. So with that, Bob, glad to have you and welcome.
Thanks a lot, George. It's great seeing you, and Jordan, thank you. And especially thanks to Fred and Team AirPro for including me today. I've been looking forward to this. And as George and Jordan teed it up, we've got a lot going on here in Washington. I'm about a block and a half, our offices are, from the Hart Senate building. So you see the activity from last week or so when President Trump spoke at the Capitol to when they're in session, when they're out of session. But it's been quite busy since January 20th for sure. I'd like to get into this a little bit, sort of big picture structure here in Washington, and then start working our way through some of the issues. As I mentioned on the first slide here, Republican trifecta, a new administration, lots of changes there, lots going on, even in the auto space, as you know. In the House, Republicans hold a 218, 214 margin over Democrats. We have some open seats. We had one death. A Houston member died a week ago. So we're very close as far as the margins in the House. In the Senate, 53-47, Republicans over Democrats. But important in all of this, when the Senate flipped, the chairs of these critical committees for us also flipped. So you have a new chairperson and a new ranking member. That does matter on policy, in addition to a new majority leader with Senator McConnell of Kentucky stepping down. So important for us, let's do the House first. Ways and Means Committee, taxes, small business issues, and trade. Energy and Commerce Committee, these are important committees for the automotive repair space. For the House Energy and Commerce Committee, we have a new chairman from Kentucky, Chairman Guthrie, who took over, and we have new subcommittee chairs, new ranking members, all sliding into probably the committee that's most important for collision and mechanical repair shops, the Energy and Commerce Committee. Judiciary Committee, which would handle a lot of the insurer, repair, antitrust issues, consumer issues. And historically, you've seen the parts battles over patent life, the length of patents, OE parts to aftermarket parts have been in the Judiciary Committee. So we have a new ranking member there that will certainly different views than possibly the previous ranking member on some of these issues. Then, of course, the Small Business Committee, not a lot of changes there, but policies, particularly in this administration, we'll see a lot more activity in the small business area, hearings and movement initiatives from the Small Business Administration, which would go through that committee. In the Senate Commerce Committee contains most of the automotive repair issues, whether it's mechanical or collision. Judiciary over there, we've had a new chairman, new ranking member. Senator Cruz of Texas is chairing the Commerce Committee. His policies and initiatives, particularly in the auto space, will be very different from the previous chair in the last Congress. And then Banking and Insurance Committee, which is an important committee for a lot of the insurer issues. Financial Services is a companion committee in the House for banking and insurance. So those are just big changes with the individuals leading, where the House and the Senate, a change of parties taking over. So those chairs and ranking members will be very different as far as policy strategies and initiatives. Republicans have been struggling some in this Congress to move the bills forward simply because the margins are so tight. So any 1 to 4 Republicans, depending on where we are, as far as replacing members stepping down, and as I mentioned earlier, we had a death of a member, a Democrat from Houston, last week. It does make a difference. It makes it tougher. I will tell you, Speaker Mike Johnson of Louisiana really put points on the board at the end of last year with the American Recovery Act. That was a tough one, took a lot of work, but they did it right before the holidays. And we feel like that was hopefully a good sign for the 119th Congress, that we will see some more things get done in the 119th than we've seen in the last couple of Congresses. Also important is that this week, the House passed their budget package, which in their CR, the continuing resolution, which is funding for fiscal year 2025 through the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. It had been predicted that that would be very tough to move forward with such a tight margin, and some Republicans not supporting the bill. At the end of the day, one Republican did not vote for the package, and we had 1 Democrat cross over from Maine. So that's a very good sign that this Congress can get things done, and we hope to see bills outside of our money bills, our funding bills, have some opportunity to pass, because we have a lot of things in auto that have been on the back burner, just sitting there, and even going back to 115th Congress with autonomous vehicle legislation coming forward, different bills, auto, that we would like to see Congress addressing, but they couldn't move. They struggle because of tight margins or opposing parties, House versus Senate. Executive branch, the Senate's been doing a good job of moving President Trump's nominees forward. We've got our core heads of our major departments, transportation, US EPA, Department of Justice, places where, and Commerce, where we really need someone. This past week, the Secretary of Labor was approved by the Senate. So the top people are moving forward. Now it gives an opportunity for deputy secretaries in some cases, assistant secretaries, administrative level in some particular agencies to go forward for this administration much quicker than Trump 1.0, his first term. And that will be an advantage to us, because you don't go and meet with the head of a cabinet official, say Secretary of Labor, on an apprenticeship issue. You're meeting with a department head or agency head or an assistant secretary, quite possibly a deputy secretary, depending on the issue. But you want these down chain appointees to move forward as quickly as possible. And we can see what the new strategy and policies are for this 4 years, many benefiting automotive repairers in the collision space. So that's a good thing. Federal agency rulemaking, we saw in the Obama administration, and to a lesser degree in the Biden administration, that not moving bills through Congress, but the regulatory process is where their initiatives were most impactful, and particularly impactful for automotive repairers and the automotive industry. You're going to see more legislation, I think more legislative activity in this Congress because you have a trifecta with both houses, Republican and a Republican administration. So you will see the administration working with the Congress more and trying to move legislative initiatives forward. Next slide. Policy implications for electric vehicles. I will tell you, having worked offices throughout the last 2 years in the House, particularly in the House, electric vehicle policy was not popular. And the Congress, particularly the House of Representatives, in any automotive training that would come up, there would always be questions about whether this is for electric vehicle training, what kind of training is this used for, what is funding used for. So this is going to be a tough 2 years for electric vehicle legislative initiatives. In fact, as mentioned on the slides, particularly for subsidies or any kind of encouragement for purchasing EVs, additional EV charging station monies, infrastructure monies. It's going to be more about what can be pulled back versus new initiatives or additional spending. So just be aware that the policies in the auto space that are probably the most dramatic for our industry would be electric vehicle policies under the last administration and the last Congress versus what we have today. This Congressional Review Act that a number in the House were looking at as an option for pulling back some of the regulations in California, particularly the actions of the California Air Resources Board and vehicle emissions, which are very broad. And as you know from previous actions by CARB relative to emissions, other states typically follow CARB's regulations. There are a number of states, 12 to 17 states, that typically will pick up what CARB initiates. The General Accounting Office, which is a government accounting office that Congress uses for investigations and reports, they came back and said the CRA cannot be used for waivers, which California has sought, and for their policies in the emissions, most recent policies in the auto emission space. So that's not law, but it's advisory and a recommendation. So we'll see how this plays out in the future, but really need to watch. Policies are in place now in California and how that plays out relative to the administration and to Congress's actions. We certainly, with the Trump team in place, will have a different view of encouraging electric vehicle infrastructure versus had Vice President Harris won. We could, let's go to the next slide. One of the things early on in the Biden administration was we had a very aggressive, high-profile chair of the Federal Trade Commission and their team effort on data access. And from early on workshops on right to repair to a full vote in the amongst the commission that I believe was unanimous, pushing forward data access and right to repair across the board, just not for the automotive sector, and really solicited examples of problems in third-party repairers, independent repairers, obtaining data from OEs to repair vehicles, washing machines, whatever. And this is likely, we're not likely to see that aggressive an approach in this space as we saw in the last Federal Trade Commission and going forward. Legislative efforts, the right to repair, or in the last Congress, the Repair Act, which was introduced by Congressman Neil Dunn of Florida, were much talked about. There'll be multiple bills. I think this time around, we have the Repair Act, of course, that's already been reintroduced by Congressman Dunn, dealing with data access. But in addition, I know ASA and SCRS and the Alliance for Automotive Innovators has introduced or offered a draft called the Safe Repair Act, which is data access, but also some additional pro-consumer and independent repair shop provisions that I'm just going to, if I could, George and Jordan, touch briefly on those that would assure consumers and shops of having access to data and others with the consumer's discretion, vehicle owner's discretion. But also it would address the OE repair procedure issue that has been around, at the state level for a number of years. It's been much talked about at our CIC conferences from various committees, but it also would contain language there that would allow shops to move forward and not be penalized for using OE repair procedures. Two items that I want to bring up that are very much both have been state issues, but it also has provisions dealing with periodic motor vehicle inspection, which is vehicle safety inspection, which is, I think we have like 15 states now that have these programs. Some are very aggressive, strong programs. Others are not, but has been popular with consumer groups, and I know with independent auto repairers. But in addition, it also takes a look and gives the authority to USDOT on post-repair collision inspection, post-repair inspection after a collision when a vehicle is resold. And I know New Mexico has a program similar to the suggested guidelines in the SAFE Act, but that will be should be popular amongst collision shops and consumers that will be interested in purchasing a used vehicle and additional information. So we're very pleased that those items are in the bill, in addition to numerous others, and particularly and most importantly here, addressing vehicle data access. The Auto Data Privacy and Autonomy Act was introduced last year and by Senator Lee and Senators Lee and Merkley in the Senate, and Congressman Burleson in the House, and really focuses on the owner of the vehicle having access to data, the owner of the vehicle having access to data. There were numerous coalitions. The rental car companies had in the last Congress to work on data access, not only for rental car companies, but consumers. And this is a tighter bill that a number of the rental car companies will support going forward. And we anticipate that will be an initiative that is reintroduced. At the state level, I mean, particularly on the collision side, numerous bills from Oklahoma to Pennsylvania, California that are important to collision shops as well as mechanical shops, but important for the right to repair issue. We have law in Massachusetts now and in Maine, and finally a judicial decision at the federal court level in Massachusetts that's been hanging out there for several years. So those are issues happening at the state level. I know from our association's concern, we've been really focused on, industry agreements and working together and trying to resolve these issues within the industry. But if we have to have legislation, we want to do it at the federal level. One of the problems you get into, particularly with MSOs, the growth of MSOs in collision, and also the growth now of MSOs a little behind collision, but also growth in that space for mechanical shops. When you have owners that have shops in multiple states, multiple laws impacting the daily life in that particular business, it's complicated. It's harder to move people around. It's harder to train, and having a national policy or a national law or national federal regulation really for shops on this issue and other issues is more valuable. Next slide, please. Okay, policy implications for insurance with this administration and with the current Congress. I don't look for any radical initiatives relative to the insurance industry and insurers' relationship with consumers and repair shops. But there's one issue area that has not been a player of significance in the collision repair space. I do want to bring to your attention, and that has to do with the Federal Insurance Office. Most shop owners don't know this exists. But in 2010, Dodd-Frank Wall Street legislation, reform legislation, which was targeting a lot of the problems going on in the financial services area, there was language that created a federal insurance office. Now, the original sponsors of this legislation, which were Congressman Ed Royce of California and Melissa Bean of Illinois, who are no longer, they've retired, lost their election since 2010. The original piece was to make this office to monitor what goes on at the state level and to see where there were pro-consumer or pro small business issues that a federal regulatory entity could address. And this is how it started out. It has been a very weak agency since its inception. One of the problems with the agency had to do with, unfortunately, the first director appointed and subsequent directors have come out of the state insurance regulatory system or structure. So they've tried to find areas to work in at the Federal Insurance Office that were really not being done at the state level and not focusing on those core issues for small businesses or consumers, or particularly for collision shops, where most of your collision regulations and all are really come up in the state legislatures or with the insurance department or attorney general's office or consumer department at the state level. You don't see them come out of Washington much. There are impactful things for collision shops out of Washington, but a lot of the day-to-day repair issues, direct repair agreements, those kind of things are all going to be dealt with generally at the state level. But FIO, or the Federal Insurance Office, has focused more on international and then looking at really core in the last administration reports and analyses about in the insurance industry and how they interact with the communities, with various communities. In the last Congress, there was an attempt by the chair of the House Financial Services Committee to eliminate FIO, to dilute it. That bill did not go forward. There's already been a bill introduced called the Federal Insurance Office Elimination Act in this Congress. It will struggle to go all the way, but certainly has a possibility of becoming law. So we'll want to watch that. It is our hope on the collision side that this agency could morph into something that would be more valuable to small businesses like collision shops and the collision industry, as well as consumers. And to date, that has not occurred. If we could, one more, next slide, please. Okay, so we've had a lot of back and forth on the tariffs, trade restrictions in the last few weeks. We're not done with that. We'll see after April 2nd where we are relative to Canada and Mexico. As all of you know, I'm sure that a lot of our parts come from other countries, Taiwan, China, and a lot through Mexico and Canada. So we'll see how this plays out. What's the end game here? But I think it's important for particularly collision shops to note that we have a really strong team, balanced team in the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and at Commerce, much more familiar with the U.S. Trade Rep, Jameson Greer, who's now been confirmed and is at USTR, who will be on point for a lot of these discussions and negotiations. He was Chief of Staff for Bob Lighthizer, who was the first trade rep under Trump 1.0. And he is quite familiar with these issues, quite familiar with the auto industry and the auto parts industry. And they'll be watching closely how this is impacting all sectors, including small businesses and including collision shops, as far as access to parts, the prices of these parts, and competition. And that's really what we want to watch for on the collision side, supply chain issues, and making sure that parts are competitive and that we have access. So we'll watch for this. We don't, I know, at any level want to go back to what we faced during COVID, the length of repairs, the difficulty obtaining parts, and that sort of thing. I do want to mention another committee entity that we want to watch closely. Congressman Molinar of Michigan became chairman of the Select Committee, House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party in last Congress after we got into the Congress. And Congressman Molinar, Chairman Molinar, is a very good leader, bipartisan. This is a bipartisan committee. If you notice, they sign a lot of letters together, come out with a lot of statements with both Republicans and Democrats in the last Congress. And I think that will continue there's some commonality there with concern about China and a lot of things that are going on. We want to watch this committee closely because they are going to have a lot of influence on not just legislation, but as far as how agencies handle what's going on relative to China, parts, tariffs, and this sort of thing. So that is a committee that is not typically one we would watch for the collision industry, but we do want to in this Congress. It's going to be important. Next slide, please. What we saw in Trump 1.1 was a real expansion of interest at the U.S. Department of Labor in apprenticeships, vocational education, community colleges, but particularly apprenticeships. And there's a lot of interest in Congress with apprenticeships of both parties, but particularly in the House. And where this kind of bubbled up, important to us with the House, and now that we have a Republican Senate, Republican president, we want to be wise, vigilant in watching legislation that touches on these issue areas, because this is a real opportunity for us. We have an administration that wants to spend time and resources on apprenticeships. And I know that House, particularly the House, will be focused on how small businesses, education entities, and the federal government can work together, as well as states and localities on municipalities on the apprenticeship area. But what will be important here, and we've learned this from the last Congress, is that these need to be broad-based training for not just electric vehicles, not just the new hybrid fuel vehicles, but also really a broader training, broader apprenticeship type programs. So this is something that I think we'll see accelerate some as far as the programs and the resources put in these programs. And at last, in Trump 1.0, the administration had an aggressive outreach program. I think, Jordan, at CIC, we had a speaker from Department of Labor, I know, for other programs around the country. I think you're going to see more of that, more people in the regional offices that are asserting themselves and with groups on apprenticeships. And we encourage shops and groups to take full advantage of that. We ran a little short last year of passing the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. It was a reauthorization of a major pro-business, pro-small business initiative for training and education. And we hope that we'll be able to see bills like this move forward in this Congress. In addition, the Perkins Act, which has been very popular with a lot of our community colleges and training entities around the country, the same going forward with that. It will require a reauthorization, hopefully in this Congress, because it ran out last year. Technician programs may be impacted by layoffs. Just clearly, we don't want to focus too much on the staffing issue. We need to see what's available. A lot of these programs are going to be pushed down to states, down to community college and technical college level. And we really want to see how the programs and the priority programs in the education and training space are distributed before we get into concerns about, as far as staffing and distribution at Department of Labor or other agencies that might fall into this area. Next slide, please. Okay, inspections, autonomous vehicles. State vehicle programs have really been neglected for decades. Really, these state programs, which I mentioned earlier, there were about 15 of them, really blew out or expanded exponentially, doubled after Congress said, if you're going to take highway safety funds, you got to have a vehicle safety inspection program at the state level. So we had a lot of programs. The next Congress came in and took that language out and said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to encourage you to have a vehicle inspection program, safety program, but we're not going to make you have one. At this point, they've been declining every few years. We lose a program. Mississippi, New Jersey, Texas rolls out this year, their program goes away. We've just had a lot of pushback in this issue area. So we're hoping the new administration and the new Congress will take a serious look at states that have programs like Pennsylvania, and that in moving legislation forward, let's say it's autonomous vehicle legislation or the SAFE Act that we're supporting with automakers and with SCRS, and take another look at these vehicle safety inspection programs and look at states that are having to admit to regulate autonomous vehicles when these might be fleets owned by an out-of-state entity that might not be tracking the safety of that vehicle like an individual owner would be tracking that my vehicle, something's not right, whether it's brakes or whatever. So I know Pittsburgh and the state of Pennsylvania went through a struggle last session about this very issue, where they were trying to determine, when you have a safety inspection program, what are the necessary items on the vehicle, pieces of equipment that should be reviewed. Possibly you wouldn't have a need for a seat belt, but you would still have needs for other equipment pieces on a vehicle to be reviewed annually or every 2 years. On the post-repair side, I mentioned earlier, this is an important piece, I know, for ASA. We'd like to see some type of post-repair inspection program, and the SAFE Act is a way to get this post-repair inspection into the discussion, where a third-party shop is reviewing vehicles when they're resold, and that has worked well in New Mexico, and we feel like it would be something that would be helpful for our industry. And we've had a couple of programs on this at CIC where we had people on both sides of the issue, and we hope that will be something that we continue to discuss in the collision marketplace and in Congress. Next slide, please. Okay. Every morning about 4 a.m. Eastern, the Federal Register has published a table of contents where people like myself and others and lobbyists in Washington are going down the contents page to see what's coming out. Well, clearly, this administration is going to be different than the previous administration. On a lot of the hardcore business issues, there will be some relief in our areas, particularly in the labor space and in other areas. So we're hopeful for that. You really haven't seen the regulatory process kick off for this administration yet because they're still getting their people in line. But I'll use an example for you that we went through last session of Congress that is an example of how vigilant we have to be about what's published and what's proposed. There was a draft regulation that was moving through US EPA that would require extensive additional record keeping for collision shops based on air quality or emissions. Above and beyond what they're doing now, shops at any level could have had extensive air quality record keeping requirements put on them, in addition to whatever state or federal regs that they were adhering to. Fortunately, after a federal advisory committee type process that the Small Business Advocacy Office and other agencies helped us with, the shops were removed from this draft at US EPA. But those are the sort of items that can catch us as small businesses when we're not careful. So I bring that up. I think we'll see less of that with this administration, and that's a good thing. We've got a number of tax provisions that expire soon into this year. Congressman Jason Smith, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, has worked very hard on a package of not only the tax extenders and trying to flip some to permanent law, but also additional provisions that'll be pro-small business. And we really want to see those provisions included in the reconciliation package moving forward, which on reconciliation, the Senate won't have to have the filibuster-proof vote, 2/3 vote. The House can move forward with only a a partisan vote with hopefully some Dems crossing over to support, and the Senate will have a lower threshold for success than they would under normal legislative conditions. So these tax initiatives coming out of the House will definitely support our, I think, our community in the collision space. Next slide. These are just, it's a newsletter we put out that tries to top line, and we have an open site that deals with legislative initiatives, and would encourage you to look at that and sign up for notices on it. It's just a way of keeping shops informed and getting them engaged in the legislative process, whether it's federal or state. Well, that's my report, George and Jordan, and I really appreciate you letting me be here today.
Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that a lot. My brain is full. Actually, I really appreciate the overview. We did have one question, Jordan. I'll take this one. We had a question come in about Trump 2.0, and I've heard that 1.0 and 2.0 before, but the question was, do you think the current administration is more pro, internal combustion, the ICE motor, versus EV? Now, before you answer, my sense was on Trump 1.0 was there was a lot of excitement about EVs and, Volkswagen, Audi, or rest of, Mercedes coming out with some unique vehicles, but it seemed like we transitioned to you have to, and that seemed to put a different spin on it, at least in my opinion. So moving forward, do you see, Trump just bought a Tesla, I guess, and
Yeah, that was yesterday, right?
yeah, it was yesterday. I'm not saying that's a signal that, that he's all EV, but
Right.
do you have a sense that, how this administration is viewing EVs? Does it happen? I guess my question is it going to happen naturally, or is there still going to be this heavy-handed, hey, you need to get this, here is a benefit for you to buy, but by the way, here it is. And of course, whenever you transition to something new, there's always little monkey wrenches in the process that need to be sorted out.
I think naturally would be we'd be skewed to at least for 2 to 4 years, depending on if the House stays Republican, during this administration. I think there's been such an investment by the OEMs. There's been investment in training and education. I think, it's going to occur naturally, but most likely not at the pace that we were rocking. One thing that I think is really important is what happens to that California Air Resources Board regulation that was pushing all of this, I think, by 2035
Yeah.
on new car sales. We need to watch that, because that is where, in all of this, and I may be missing something, but to me, that's where this comes down. If that moves forward, that is a real hardcore timeline. And with California, and particularly these additional states that follow California, that's a lot of vehicles. Might not be over 50%, but it's a strong super minority of vehicles in the U.S., and that will have a lot of influence.
Thank you.
So I will ask a question going back to the obviously we hear a lot about the shortage of technicians, which interestingly, I just this past week, I've been hearing, or a couple weeks, the number of claims is down. So it's interesting, like some shops are reporting back that I think we're going to hold off on taking new apprentices or new employees for a little bit. I think we got really used to that high volume and long wait lists and things like that, and that was really good for needing to support schools coming up with apprenticeship programs. So do you see, going back to that information about the trades and the influence that money could bring, what is your purview of, like, from initialization to execution to when could we possibly be seeing things in the actual marketplace?
Ooh, I think we'll have to see all the way to the assistant secretary level at Department of Labor, because they would be over the apprenticeship part. Also, if any of these education initiatives, the big ones, authorization move, you're going to see an effort by a lot of groups to get more automotive in there, more specific initiatives. And one item to think about, I know we've had a lot of interest in the piece about older technicians that are already on the job that are not going to take a year off or 2 years off and go back to school. They want remote or virtual, some type of training, education, exercise that gets them up to speed without having the commitment of leaving the workplace and the significant investment the shop would make, and they're not being there and physically there. So I think we need to look at the ingredients, or look at these authorization bills organically. How does this fit with us? And I will tell you, there is a tremendous interest, particularly in the House, by the current majority, in what we think and how we get up to speed with these newer vehicles. And all last year, particularly last year, we were very interested in what the appropriations, or the bill that funds the Department of Labor, what it looked like in this area. And I do think you're going to see a more aggressive piece, because the appropriations process starts in the House, then goes to the Senate. And the House members that are involved in those subcommittees and the committee, they're very interested in small businesses, and particularly where we're standing in the gap between the traditional vehicles that we've had moving to these hybrids and EVs, zero emission vehicles. They're very interested in that. It is of interest, and we need to take advantage of it and make sure these programs are broad enough to cover our folks. And candidly, it can't just be in urban areas. The EVs are everywhere, and they're going to be in more places. And for these rural communities that might have 1 or 2 collision shops, and the training opportunities are an hour away, we've got to figure that out. And that's something that I think, surprisingly, members of Congress are more attuned to that than many of us think. And we just need to take full advantage of that from the collision space.
That's encouraging on that, and other questions for like the Safe Repair Act and things like that.
Yeah.
So George, I know you had a question that you wanted to bring up, and then I think I have another behind you.
All right, real quick, Bob, thank you. This is a compliment. I had a bunch of questions and you basically answered them all. So thank you very much. And I was really kind of curious about how, this administration in some cases let the state do it. And then there's obviously odd lines on the federal side. But really what it's boiled down to is enforcement. And I can tell you in my experience, after the dust settles and a decision is made, and even if I don't like it from an insurance perspective, a couple of things I ask myself is, okay, if this is what we have to do, my first question is everybody got to do it? Are there steps in place for those who don't do it? And I really want to know, is it enforced? In other words, I can name a few things in a certain states that they have a licensing provision or some provision, and it's not enforced. And is that does the Federal Insurance Office, are they part of that? Who is going to look at cases where, yeah, that law is in place? Well, you violate it. Yeah, I know. Well, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. It needs to be enforced. Is there any comments about enforcing these things? It's one thing to make the decision, but do they get enforced, and who is that role? Whose role is it?
I think in the auto space, particularly for the Federal Insurance Office, they're not enforcers. I think they have subpoena power, but that is not, I don't see that in anytime soon. It just, there's some authorization issues, and that's not, where they've been. They've been more in the international insurer, U.S. State regulatory area and reports. But I will tell you, I think on enforcement, more and more of the consumer groups are going to the Federal Trade Commission. I think that's the first stop for many. NHTSA, of course, is a tough enforcer, but what you get a lot of times, I think this is pretty common for every sector of the auto industry, insurance industry, would be when you come up with great ideas, it's lack of staff, lack of resources. So this is kind of going to work against a lot of the staff cuts that we're seeing now, or ever how it shakes out, it's not going to be more. That us coming up with great ideas for NHTSA to do, they're going to require staffing and additional money, and that's going to be hard. We've got to really justify it if we're moving in that area.
Perfect, thank you.
So we have an audience question, and then I think we have time for maybe one more, George. So this question is, I had previously noticed that, quote, conman interface, such as generic J2534 and PCs for use to access vehicle data, was not included in Repair Act drafts as it was previous MOU mass right to repair. Are there plans or discussions to address this?
Good question.
I will tell you, this issue's been around since around 2000, even before in Arizona and California. It's been around a long time. It would shock you at how many members and staff, even though a lot of the legislative assistants in individual offices haven't been here that long, how informed they are about this. At some point, because you've got multiple ways of coming at this, not just the Repair Act, not just the SAFE Act, not just what the car rental guys presented last year or presenting this year. They're quite informed. I think where we end up is going to be somewhere that I think addresses every type of vehicle and every vehicle in the foreseeable future. The OEMs agreed in July of 23 with ASA and SCRS to have these two committees, one to address today's data issues. Let's say, George, your vehicle, a problem today, and you can't get the data you need to repair it, to address that, okay? But also a working group to address those problems in the future, whatever type of fuel, whatever drives that vehicle, whatever type of material is used to build that vehicle. And that was a voluntary agreement. So I think when Congress gets down to, if they move forward with legislation, if it's going to be something that has a really intelligent look at resolving this and being done with it. And that doesn't mean just in real time. It doesn't mean just with EVs, but a broader, longer look at our industry, and a healthy way to do it. And it's something that's been around that long, 20, 25 years, they understand the issue. It's been a political issue, whether you want legislation or you don't want legislation. But I think if it comes to it, and this is the Congress that finally puts it to bed, it's going to be a very thoughtful document.
Thanks for that, Bob. George, do you have one more, and then?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay.
Because of time-wise, I think I'm fine.
Okay. Then I'll be the first to say, Bob, that was really informative. And I know from a shop perspective, especially if you're an S Corp, you might have picked up on that 20% less taxes one-liner on there. That might be the one takeaway we all get today. But no, I've definitely, I'm not been a like, what political party matters. It's what matters to our businesses, right? And I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing on the business front in this new administration, and that the House and Senate are moving things. So I'm looking forward to more updates from you.
Yeah, I think, and that's CIC is. I'm doing it sound like I'm doing a commercial, but thanks to AirPro for having this.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
sure.
how often you can see Bob
Thank
and
you,
go to
Bob.
CIC. I think that's a real positive thing. It was really great, Bob. Thank you very, very much for your time and your expertise. And I'll always listen. Always listen to what you say, because I think that's good for everybody to be well informed, and you do bring a great perspective. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you both for having me, and thanks to Team AirPro.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Bob.
All right, George, do you want to do a little post-show wrap-up?
All right, so real quick, we only got a couple minutes. Here's my thing. I mentioned enforcement. I just have a hard time, and you see it across the board. I just saw a thing that, if China can't bring some to us, well, we'll send it to Mexico, and then Mexico. I mean, there's always these workarounds. And
Yeah.
I think we're at a point where I don't think we can tolerate workarounds. You always have case by case. There's and as an insurer, you handle claims case by case. Your policy is your guideline, and that's as clear as can be. But as things, they start to work around, and I would like to, enforcement is what I worry about. I mentioned a state that, they have a license for the auto body. They get busted if they get busted. And
Yeah,
then
there's only
close
even a
down,
couple of those states.
and they open up another store under another name, and it's just this vicious loop. And that's just the piece I was asking about. I thought it was really good, but I think all of us need to focus on, regardless of what happens, is it consistent? Can we stop workarounds, and is there an enforcement piece? And I think that's good for everybody, but that's just me.
Yeah, maybe, George, one day we could debate the merit of federal level insurance oversight and the possibilities for that, because like every state right now is different when it comes to oversight of insurance, oversight of collision repair. And I live in and work in 2 local states that have no licensing for either. And so that's unfortunate. And in 2 departments of insurance that seem, I'm being recorded, worthless. For both sides, honestly. I actually had a really interesting talk with a lady who was in regulatory for insurance, and she said it was the worst agency she had to work with. So I know there's frustration in government on both sides, and it does seem like there are huge opportunities. I don't know if like some of these federal offices are just going to keep getting whacked. I don't know if there's possibility in this administration it's going to go upstairs, but I like very recently these things have been on my desk, and so it's I like the fact that we can get these updates from people like Bob, and he's telling us like, oh, here's the high level, but this is what matters to you guys. And so I do think that Safe Repair Act, I've heard both from ASA with Bob and from SCRS with Aaron Schulenberg, that is something that really could address a lot of global issues for our industry. So I think that is right now the big one to watch for us.
Yeah, and the only other thing is, I encourage the industry on both sides to seek out, because you can go to both sides and hear the story, because both sides, it happens everywhere. But what I like about Bob and his role is he go, hey, here's what's happening. Here's what you need to pay attention to. And I think we need to stay connected to that any chance we can, because that is really valuable. I learned, although I had, like I said, I had questions and they all got answered. So I thought that was it was worth it. But man, I just would like consistency, and I think our consumers want it too. And
yeah. The one selfish ad I know we're right up on the hour, and I know we just have one more FYI, which is that our next session is April 23rd. But I would say for anybody listening, and especially the recording too, like whatever state you're in, get really knowledgeable and cozy with your state association too on legislative issues, because every state is different, and a lot of the associations are who are watching and paying attention and advocating. I think that's the place to start.
well, thanks, Fred.
And one last thing, if for those that are going to view this, or those that are still on the call, get that QR code and sign up so that you can get regular updates.
Yeah.
I just want to remember.
Well, thanks to AirPro. Thanks, Fred.
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you so much, Fred.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Appreciate
Till
it.
next
Take
time.
care. You bet.
You too.
See ya.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.